Hey guys, it's Tim K, and I want to read you guys a scary Reddit story while I just play some Minecraft. Anyway, here's the story, and I hope you lay back and enjoy. If you've ever worked late at night, you know how time feels strange, like the world pauses, and you're the only idiot still moving. My name is Hector. I'm 22, and on weekends I work the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store. It's not a very big place. There is barely four tight aisles. The wall of the refrigerator's in the back, and the checkout island where we spend most of the night. That Friday I was working with Julia, who is always distracted, almost always bored, and looks at everything with indifference. But the truth is, we get along well. As long as there's no manager nearby, we leave each other alone. I arrived exactly at 10 o'clock at night. The air conditioning had cooled the place, and it smelled like the coffee left brewing by the previous shift. From 10 to 12 at night, it was a completely normal shift. I stayed at the register, charging groups of young people, buying alcohol and ice before we're no longer allowed to sell it. By the time midnight hit, the flow of people disappeared. The store is left in a heavy silence that is only interrupted by the electrical hum of the white refrigerators in the back. Not even Julia made a noise, since she had sat in her spot, playing with her headphones on. Since there was no more customers, I went to the aisles to do inventory. I wrote down the count of beer, ice, and sodas, since that was all that had been sold in those 2 hours. I would leave the rest for her later. By the time 2 a.m. hit in the morning, I had already counted and arranged everything that could be arranged. The boredom was killing me. My stomach started to growl. I walked towards the fast food area right next to the register, where we had a coffee machine and a pretty dirty microwave. I removed the plastic from my food and opened the microwave door to put it in. Right at that moment, the glass doors at the entrance bursted open. A man almost 40 years old came in pushing them urgently. I left food on the counter when I saw his attitude. He looked extremely nervous. He came in walking backwards without taking his eyes off the street, and then moved forward, stumbling until he got into one of the aisles, shrinking as if he was looking for somewhere to hide. Immediately my instincts kicked in. This area is not dangerous. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the store is open 24 hours without much problem. But in the early morning, there's always someone with a bold idea. The first thing I thought was that the man was running from a robber, and seeing the store lights, decided to take refuge inside. I moved a bit closer to the counter, and raising my voice enough for him to hear me, I asked the man if he was okay and if he needed me to call the police. He picked his face out of the hiding spot right behind the chips aisle. He was pale, sweating cold, and his eyes were still fixed on the main door. He answered me with a trembling voice that said yes. He told me that someone was following him. But suddenly he closed his mouth. It was clear he was going to say something else, something important, but he held back and crouched down again. By this moment, Julia had already taken her headphones off and had stopped playing them. I looked at her, and she nodded at me with a serious expression. No matter how distracted she was also aware of the real dangers of the night shift. She took the landline phone from the register and called emergency services. She explained the situation quickly and in a low voice while she hung up. She made a gesture to inform me that they would send a patrol to roam the area. That was good. Normally, the mere presence of a unit would deter any thief thinking of entering. We would only have to wait for them to arrive on time, which was likely because there was always patrols nearby in the area. The reason why almost no one goes around robbing stores here. We informed the man to call the police, hearing that he seemed to comfort him a little, since he let out a heavy sigh, although he didn't move from the aisle. I thought it was best to secure the place, so I headed towards the entrance with my keys in my hand to lock the glass door. I was about 3 steps away from doing it when it happened. A loud and dry sound echoed in the structure of the place, like a heavy hit on the roof, and suddenly the electricity in the store went out. It was instant. The sound of fluorescent lights and the hum of all refrigerators cut out at once. We were left submerged in absolute silence and darkness. The only light left in the place was the yellow and sickly glow of the lamp on the other side of the street, which barely managed to filter through the glass door, drawing long and deformed shadows on the store floor. Without thinking, I covered the steps I had and quickly slid the bolt on the glass door. Julia approached me, walking blindly in the dimness. She was clearly confused and whispered, asking, "What the hell is going on?" Behind us, hidden in his aisle, I heard the man start breathing heavily again. His terror had returned at all once. Julia and I looked through the glass toward the street. It was empty, illuminated only by that yellow and lonely light from the sidewalk across. We didn't see anyone, not a single shadow moving. However, almost instantly, a pressure settled in our chest. It was a strange and overwhelming sensation, the absolute certainty that someone was staring at us from the darkness outside. That primitive instinct of feeling haunted made both of us take a step back, moving away from the glass by an area. We took out our phones to use the flashlights and at the same time check if the patrol was nearby. But our screens showed the same thing. Not a single bar of signal. No internet connection. Julia tried to remain calm, but suggested that it was surely just a general blackout in the block, and that the power would return at any moment. I shook my head in the darkness. I reminded her that the store had emergency generators, and that having gone through blackouts before, we knew perfectly well that at least the auxiliary lights should turn on. I raised my phone and pointed the flashlight toward the upper corner of the walls, pointing out those small rectangular lights that were now completely dead. Someone or something had cut the power from the root. We were processing that when a violent noise left us completely paralyzed. The metallic and heavy sound of a door slamming shut echoed in the silence of the store. It came from the back. It was the storage room door, as if someone had slammed it in from the inside. The problem is that the door also led to an alley at the back of a street, but by protocol, it was always, without exception, locked, unless we were receiving a supplier. And at 2 a.m, there was no supplier. I felt Julia's fingers digging into my arm with a strength I didn't know she had. She didn't say a single word, but her breathing turned into a fast and rough gasp. Panic spread in a second. The man who was hiding shot out of his aisle and ran towards the main doors, pushing the glass desperately. But he ran into the bolt I had just put in place. One of pure area. Or maybe because of the stupid instinct of wanting to face the danger. I raised my phone, I pointed the flashlight beam toward the end of the central aisle, straight at the frame of the storage room door. The beam barely reached there, getting lost in the darkness, but it was enough. There was something peeking from the edge of the door. It was a humanoid silhouette, but its proportions were wrong. It was a little over 2 meters tall. Its head almost touched the top frame, and it moved. But it did so in an unnaturally slow way, sliding towards us millimeter by millimeter. Julia's scream burst into my eardrum and broke the trance. I broke free from her grip and ran towards the entrance. My hands were shaking so much that the keys clashed with each other with an unbearable jingle. I missed the lock twice, feeling that thing getting closer behind my back, until finally the metal fit and turned. I pushed the door with my shoulder. The three of us shot right out of the store, tripping over our own feet, and we didn't stop running until we reached the middle of the street. Right under that, the yellow lamp that was still on. Outside there was a cutting cold, but at that moment I could barely feel it. Adrenaline had me numb. The streets were completely immersed in darkness, as if the blackout hadn't affected only the store, but the whole block, or maybe the entire neighborhood. We stayed there, standing under the amber circle light. With our eyes fixed on the glass door of the store, a rational part of my brain expected that, if it was a common robber, he would take advantage of the moment to grab the money from the register and run out the way he came in. But deep in my stomach, I knew perfectly well that this was not a robbery. Whatever we saw peeking in the aisle was not looking for money. The man who had stopped next to us was panting erratically, almost babbling incomprehensible words while frantically looking around. Julia was already literally glued to me, trembling from head to toe. I thought about running. My instinct demanded that I get out of there. But when I looked towards the end of the streets, the absolute darkness stopped me in cold. That thick blackness made me feel much more exposed and in danger than staying planted under that lonely light. The lamp above our heads flickered a little bit, emitting an electrical hum, but I didn't take my eyes off the store. The interior had turned into a black cave where nothing could be distinguished, but I needed to see if that thing crossed the door, to have the final trigger and run, no matter the darkness. But nothing happened, nothing moved. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. I could no longer hear the man. I turned to where he had been just a second ago, expecting to see him catching his breath, but he was nowhere. I scanned the edges of the circle of light and forced my eyes into the nearby shadows. I shouted to him, asking where he had gone, but the echo of my own voice bounced off the dark buildings. The silence of the street was the only answer. Then to both of our relief, arithmetic blue and red flash cut through the darkness of the avenue. The white headlights of a car illuminated everything in its path, sweeping away those shadows until the police patrol car parked a few meters from the store. Julia and I ran towards the vehicle before the officers even finished getting out. The two policemen saw us, agitated, and immediately asked for explanations. With broken breathing, it didn't take long for us to explain that someone or something had entered the store while we were in the dark. Seeing our state of panic, the officers opened the back doors of the patrol car and allowed us to get in so we could feel safer while they checked the store. Once inside the car, silence wrapped around us. Julia hugged her knees, staring blankly and completely mute. I, on the other hand, couldn't take my eyes off the windshield, watching as the two men walked towards the store entrance with their flashlights drawn. Barely a few seconds after the officers crossed the glass threshold, a heavy hum ran through the environment. The electricity came back on all at once. The fluorescent lights in the store flickered and turned on full power, and at the same time the rest of the street lights came to life. Normality returned from second to the next, as if someone had simply flipped a giant switch. Shortly after, the policeman came out and approached the patrol car to tell us that the store was completely empty. There was no one inside. They asked us to accompany them back and guide them to make sure there was no blind spots. With our hearts still in our throats, we walked with them through the aisles, the bathrooms, and the storage room. There was nothing. Everything was in place, even my half-uncovered food on the microwave. To reassure us, the patrol stayed parked outside for a couple more hours while we stayed inside the checkout island. Julia still barely spoke, although she was breathing more calmly. It was obvious she didn't want to discuss out loud what had just happened, and honestly, neither did I. Before the officers left to continue their rounds, we informed them about the man who had hidden at the beginning and how he disappeared on the street. They took note, but clarified that aside from searching the surrounding streets for them, they couldn't do much, even if the subject had simply fled. The hours dragged on until dawn finally arrived. 5 in the morning came, our shift ended, and the replacement co-workers arrived. We gave them a very brief and sanitized summary of the events, mentioning only a blackout and a scare caused by a strange guy who came in and ran off. We grabbed our backpacks and left the store without looking back. We were walking in silence towards the bus stop, feeling the cold morning air in our faces. While the adrenaline finally wore off, my brain returned to processing logic. Suddenly, something in my mind made a disturbing click. I stopped dead in my tracks. I slowly turned back toward the store, remembering exactly how we had fled in the middle of the darkness. Then I shifted my gaze to the sidewalk across the street, looking for the exact spot we had taken refuge under that saving circle of yellow light. A knot of ice formed in my stomach, and I felt ground shift beneath me. There was no lamp. There was no light pole. planted on the sidewalk. There was no light fixture on the facade of the building across. There was absolutely nothing that could have projected that orange light under which we had been standing. We had been standing under something else.